Hello everybody, welcome to another Detailed Diatribe. I am Blue and I'm joined by Red.
This is the sleepiest I've been in probably actual years.
Actually ever. She made the effort to get out of her coffin abode, slink off the vampire cape and get into the recording booth to do this video today.
I've been posted up in a coffin under Gresham for a year to recover from accidentally staying up until 6 a.m. watching Castlevania.
You texted me, it was like, hey, so funny story. Yeah. I'm like, why are you awake? And you're like, that's the funny part.
Yeah. I found a way to accidentally hack myself into infinite productivity because I was simultaneously... You gave me a very commendably small homework assignment for this one.
2 episodes.
2 episodes. Episodes 3 and 4 of season 3. And I was like, okay, cool, I'll throw those up in the background. And in the meantime, I just finished my comic line art and shading for chapter 3 of season 2 or whatever. So I was like, okay, I've got 42 pages. I need to just do some paint bucket coloring. Okay, sure. Which meant I was doing the double whammy of, I can just do one more page and I can just watch one more episode. And that's how it was 6 a.m. But I got it done, baby. And I did sleep a little bit, so, like, we're good, probably.
You did.
This is probably fine.
A wink of sleep in between.
I'm the kind of sleep-deprived where I feel totally normal, but I keep finding things just a little bit out of place because my brain's not quite working right. It's like, oh, I put this down here instead of where I normally put it because in the moment it made sense. All right, that's fun. So it's a little bit like I'm being haunted by a poltergeist, and the poltergeist is also me.
On the subject of malign forces in the universe and spooky things all around, today we are talking about the Netflix Castlevania show, and specifically the human face of evil therein. This is a thesis that's been kind of bouncing around in the back of my skull since we did our earlier Detailed Diatribe, because Castlevania is good as hell from 2017 to 2021, and with Nocturne, the second series of this show coming back in a few months. Ooh. We are very excited to be talking about it. Us here at OSP dearly adore this show. It's so goddamn good. In fact, as mentioned, we have talked about this before. This is not our first foray into Castle Dracula. A handful of years back, we did our one evil scene, or whatever, one villainous scene, You Must Be the Belmont, which is one of our earliest forays into the Detailed Diatribe format, and one that we were still very proud of. But, of course, it's time to come back, because we got more stuff to talk about with Castlevania. So, if you haven't watched the previous one, or if you haven't watched the show, that's okay. Spoilers abound, but we are going to be talking about a show that unfolds like an elegant mechanism. Everything just fits and flows so seamlessly. They do not rely on shock value or one-and-done plot twists where like all the enjoyment is squished out of it as soon as you've seen it once. This show is so good no matter how many rewatches you're on, so we will be talking about the whole of the show, but that's okay. You can listen to this and then go watch the series and still get basically the full enjoyment out of it. But also it's been like half a decade, so you've probably seen it by now if you're a fan of this channel. So let it be known. But we begin Castlevania Season 1, Episode 1 with Dracula's very simple motivation. Do it for her. It is genocide. Do genocide for Lisa Tepesh.
Oh, Dracula, that's what you always say.
He has like a spin the wheel when wronged by humanity, and it's always genocide.
It's like, you know that thing where it's like, it's a clock and all of the entries are like a duel, and it's Yami Yugi like, goodness, would you look at the time? It's just that, but for murder.
Exactly, exactly. But why's Dracula got his fangs in a twist? What's the deal with that? Well, you see, Dracula actually kind of is in the right about this, maybe, because the show opens as sympathetically to the man as possible, where the Wallachans kill Dracula's wife for witchcraft. He gives them a year to leave, to not quite atone, but like get out of my face so that I don't have to think about you, and then maybe we'll just like let it slide. They stay. 1 year later, they have like a celebration to gloat about it, and then bats start falling out of the sky and raining blood, and everyone dies.
And it's interesting because, like, they really make it clear that Lisa, like, Dracula's Dracula. Like, we haven't seen him do any atrocities yet, but we know he's Dracula. We know he's intimidating.
We know he's Dracula.
Like,
yeah.
Lisa...
I mean, the show opens with a field of skulls in front of his castle.
Yeah.
Like, skeletons on pikes.
Like, we get the picture. This is Vlad the Impaler. We understand. But, like, Lisa is just so precision crafted to be lovable that it really immediately endears us to her, and then by extension Dracula through her, and we don't see the details of how she gets to be put on trial for witchcraft exactly until the beginning of season 2, which was part of my 6 a.m. productivity binge, so it's fresh in my mind. But even before that, all we know about Lisa is that she wants to learn how to do medicine so she can help people better. And there's this very interesting undercurrent in the show that runs through all of it, which is basically all the bad guys are willfully ignorant. Like, all the really bad guys. That's the whole thing that defines them, is that, like, the good guys are, like, trying to understand and learn things and document history and figure out what's going on. And the bad guys are just like, a witch, I see. You made a device that spins very well to the torch with you. And it's like, oh, this guy. Not even using his damn brain. Like... It's an interesting little writing hack that one of the ways that you can immediately enrage an audience is by making them see a villain who's being willfully obtuse and then making innocent people suffer because they are refusing to think. Yeah. It's like, oh, they're so stupid. I just want to see somebody throw a bunch of bats at them about it. You know, that kind of thing. It's a very clever little bit of narrative sleight of hand to immediately get us on board with, like, oh, these superstitious, ignorant peasants, maybe they should be all set on fire or something.
Yes, and this is very well done on the part of the show because it immediately clues us in within episode 1 that there is more dimensionality to evil than just killing all the humans. I joke that, Dracula's right. Of course, he's wrong. Yeah. He's a villain. He's a bad guy.
Murder is always bad, just to be clear.
There are more forms of evil than just exterminating the human race. There are more insidious, more subtle kinds of evil, and that is what we're going to talk about today. If Dracula is not the only one who is evil, who else is evil? And if we can craft a thesis out of this, what is evil, if we're trying to look in the macro here. Good. For every flaming face in the sky over Tagovishta, there's 100 human faces down below that are just as capable through willful ignorance or malice or anything else of willing evil into existence in the world. So we're going to be looking at what that means, not just monsters, but the humans who willfully enable those monsters to do evil acts. Because at every step in this entire damn show, humans are manifesting evil right alongside vampires.
Yeehaw.
This read exactly as you mentioned on the subject of the bad, evil church in this show starting us off. They are on the witch hunt to genocide pipeline and trying to speed run that as fast as possible.
Naturally, for maximum efficiency.
Yeah. They get a tip about Lisa doing something weird and evil and satanic, so they crack open her door, go inside her house, wreck all of her stuff, and are like, yes, this confirms the biases that I already was going to hold anyway, but now I found a thing that spins, so this lady needs to die. Mm-hmm. It affirms their nominally holy aims as part of the Inquisition. And what's interesting about the consequences of the bishop and the church doing all of this is that Dracula was in the process of becoming more human. It's discussed in a later season, but in Lisa having Dracula wander the earth and travel as a human, he was starting to get more sympathy for humans and starting to, in many ways, become good, sharing his knowledge, becoming a better person. She was turning him, as in, like, turning him human. The same language of, like, oh, why didn't Dracula turn her into a vampire? Well, it's because Lisa was, secretly all along turning him human. It is this process that is interrupted by the evilness that humans have manifested, and because of that, it's bye-bye Wallachia, so,
I do think one interesting thing specifically about this key part of the human face of evil in Castlevania is that Lisa is this embodiment of not, like, pure incorruptible goodness. Like, she feels like a human being, but she's on the side of reason and, like, understanding and learning and stuff like that. She's very much about, like, you, Dracula, have this immense repository of wealth of knowledge. You could educate people. Like, a lot of the reason why these people are suffering is because they don't know better, but you could teach them. And if you teach me, I can help them. And so her whole thing is this embodiment of, like, it's about logically reasoning your way through stuff. It's literally about facts and logic. And then Churchman rolls up and is like, basically, there is absolutely nothing you can say to dissuade me from the conclusion I have already drawn that you are a witch. And there is nothing you can do to stop me from killing you about it because I have all the power in this situation. So this is kind of like layers of injustice because we, the audience, are like, oh, okay, so he's this power-hungry despot, basically, but also, like, he's fundamentally opposing this underlying thesis that we, from the future, know to be correct, which is learning stuff and educating yourself is always better than not doing that.
all of this general stink of evil around the Bishop character ends up becoming his undoing, because when things start going down in Tagovishta on the 1-year anniversary of that time they burned that witch, it will never cause us any problems again.
That time the flaming face exploded out of the sky and was like, I'm going to murder you all for killing my wife, and everyone was like, that was probably a mass hallucination or something.
If I had a nickel for each time, giant face in the sky.
That happens every time we burn a witch.
This takes us to the sequence where the Bishop is in the church and the night creatures come inside, and he's like, wait a minute, that's illegal. You can't come in here. This is a house of God. And my favorite line read in the whole goddamn show is when this night creature says, God is not here. Because what this does for the lore theologically is create a narrative environment where God is not only 100% real in the context of this show, he fucking hates you.
Well, he hates these guys.
Yeah, no, you as in the Bishop.
Right, yeah. What it's interesting is, of course, because it is based on, Castlevania, the video game, where holy water and consecrated weapons are like the thing, because you're fighting vampires. Of course, the world building of the show has to be like, yeah, no, God's real. Holy power is real, and vampires are allergic to it, and creatures of hell are allergic to it. That's how it works. So what this means is it gives the writers a very powerful tool to be like, okay, this rando Joe Schmo can make holy water because he's not a terrible person, but this guy can be standing in a whole ass church and get his throat ripped out by demons because he's so bad that God's like, I pretend I do not see it. It's just, oh man.
Yeah, exactly. Holiness in various forms is a consistent weapon that's employed against night creatures and vampires over the course of the show, from Trevor's consecrated whip and Morning Star to holy water and other, anti-vampire things. I don't think we ever see silver bullets because no guns, but we,
guns.
Crosses and stuff. We get the explanation of big geometric shapes in their faces freak them out.
That one's so funny because they clearly have to straddle the line between God is real and holy powers are a real thing, but how do we account for the fact that we're also acknowledging that Christianity is not the de facto correct read on the way things work, and thus everything in the world is allergic to it, even if they've never seen a crucifix in their life? And the answer is just holy water is a thing, but a holy symbol, it's not that it's holy, it's that it's a big complicated shape in their field of view, and it freaks out their predator brains for some goddamn reason. That feels like the writer's room being like, guys, how are we going to resolve this? We've been so good about acknowledging other cultures and religions and stuff like this. Are we really going to also be like, but also crucifixes work on everything?
Seeing this holy weapon fail tells us a lot about what's going on in Tagovishta, and with this bishop specifically, where the monster says, we love you. Your God hates you. Your life's work makes him puke, but we love you. We couldn't be here without you. So again, a character perfectly stating my thesis for me. Thank you, Mr. Night Creature.
Thank you, Mr. Night Creature. You're the real MVP of the season.
Yes. As we get further into the show, we learn about our heroes, we assemble the Golden Trio. It's an interesting cast of characters because all of them to some degree have been wronged by the ills of the world. Lisa was, snatched and burned, and Alucard has reason to be mad about that, and he says, I grieve with you to Dracula, but I won't commit genocide. Alucard has a motivation here to think that humanity's bad. The Belmonts were excommunicated by the church on suspicion of black magic, and then killed en masse by frightened, angry Wallachians, and the Speakers, a not-so-subtle allegory to Jewish populations in Europe, were constantly in danger of violent pogroms. So all three of our characters here have some first-hand experience of the evil that regular people can commit, not through some grand evil scheme of, power for the church in Wallachia and, I will be the church, I'll be all this. It's just people being scared and angry and hateful.
It's a very strange and complicated angle for the show to work with because, of course, the entire premise is, yeah, these people suck. However, saving them is also the right thing to do. So the show has to very carefully show that, yes, frightened, ignorant people are easily manipulable into doing bad things. And, being frightened and ignorant also makes it easy for a person to make decisions that hurt other people. But there's also the potential for goodness. If they can be helped, they can be taught, they can be, shown that hey, what you're doing is extremely fucked up and harmful to people, and maybe you should stop that and focus on the actual problem. But again, in order to think of that, you need to understand what the actual problem is, and if somebody's being kept in ignorance, then there's not much they can do, which is why our heroes are pretty constantly being like, okay, we need to help these people. We also need to train these people. And that's a fun thing that gets a lot of airplay in season 1. And then after a while, it's kind of mostly Sypha's job to be like the token, extremely competent person who knows how to actually handle human beings, where Trevor and Alucard kind of suck on that.
It shows up a handful of times in season 4 to comedic effect, but also as good characterization.
Yeah, whereas Trevor is really, really good at killing monsters and rallying people to kill monsters. So there's a lot of points in season 1 where after, the torches and pitchforks get kind of out of everybody's system, he's like, okay, here is how you kill demons. You guys over here, and like rallies a bunch of basically just normal-ass peasantry into successfully repelling an invasion of night creatures just by teaching them.
Yeah,
which is tremendously cool, because it's all about like, look, humans have a lot of potential. They're capable of tremendous evil, but like if you give them a chance, some of them will still be like the bishop, but some of them will be good.
And that's a genre of scene that actually plays out a few times over the course of the show, where some combination of Sypha, Trevor, and Alucard are basically in command of a group of mild to moderately trained humans and successfully coach them into defending themselves, whereas they would have gotten slaughtered otherwise. It plays out a handful of times in the show, and it's neat to see it happen.
Sorry. I had such a minor side note, because the thing is, those scenes are so good, but they always really highlight that this show had like 0 voice actors on call to do background extras, because anytime there's a large crowd of people, it's just dead silent. It's just our heroes like pointing and characters like occasionally miming. It's really noticeable when Dracula's generals are in his castle and they're all like frantically arguing with one another, but there's no sound. Oh, I love this show dearly.
That's hilarious.
It was like the thing that I couldn't stop thinking about last night when I was doing my rewatch. I was like, it's so funny, because of course a lot of these guys are like, celebrities. Like Richard Armitage is like Trevor Belmont, and everyone else is like similarly mostly a screen actor. And it's just clear that they didn't really have like a stable of 2 or 3 voice actors on call to be like, hey, can you do like 5 distinctive female voices for the background of this episode? They just don't have that. Anyway.
Get your Lowenthal on call to just do a bunch of yelling and then ascribe that to 6 or 7 extras.
Exactly. Like, I'm sure they had like a whole library of just horrible death screams that they could use and stuff like that, but for the most part, nobody talks.
That's good. But speaking of people arguing in Dracula's court, in season 2, we get to see the inner workings of what's going on at Castle Dracula, because we essentially start the series from Dracula's POV and then completely pan away as we follow Trevor and Sypha and then eventually Alucard. Season 2 gives us that look at what's going on in Dracula's inner circle, and this was essentially, that section was the entire last detailed diatribe on Castlevania, so I won't retread too much, but for the purpose of this video, the Forge Masters are fascinating characters in the human face of evil because they are essential to Dracula's army for 2 reasons. One is that they are the only 2 generals not driven by thirst, is what Dracula says. They are purely intellectual haters of humanity. There's no emotion in it. They just want them fucking dead.
Yeah.
And it's telling that they don't have these kind of conflicting motivations of like, oh, I want to feed, I want to do this. It makes Dracula's other generals impulsive in other ways, or bad decision makers. Whereas Hector and Isaac are like, don't worry, I've 4D chess to this. I know exactly what we're going to do. But also mechanically, humans are essential for creating night creatures, and we get a little bit of the lore behind that in season 3. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but they are, for 2 reasons, essential to Dracula's military operation, and it's really cool to see that even in the vampire genocide war machine, humanity is still essential, not just as a motivator, but as an engine for that conquest and that large-scale wanton bloodshed and murder. And also an interesting detail is they value night creatures because they are purely loyal with no capacity for deceit or malice or betrayal, which is funny because those are basically all the human qualities that random people in the show, like human extras, are given. And Hector and Isaac both love night creatures because they are so completely unhuman. They are like basically if pets could talk.
Which is funny because traditionally deceit, malice, and betrayal are like the 3 things demons are known for.
Yes.
It's interesting. They do a lot of work to be like, humanity is always responsible for anything like complicated. And the thing is, the vampires in this show are fairly human in a lot of ways. And that's interestingly portrayed. But night creatures are, for the most part, viewed as like, yeah, this is basically just an animal. There's a couple that show up later where it's like, that's yeah, we're doing the thing where demons used to be human souls, but they were like changed through being in hell. So there's a pretty diverse array of night creatures that show up later, including one that can just straight up talk and remembers being a philosopher in Athens who was,
Yes.
horribly killed. I'm sure we'll get to Fly Eyes later. But Hector and Isaac in season 2 are very much like, oh yes, we are here for facts and logic. We've reasoned through this and we think humans should die. And then afterwards it kind of becomes clear like, yeah, I mean, I understand why you felt that way, but like have a Snickers and maybe a conversation with a real human being once in a while and like, diversify your opinions a little bit. Like maybe think about this.
Okay, hold on.
Oh.
Hold on. Literally, you're not you and you're hungry, have a berry from 20 slides later.
Oh, I'm too powerful. I can't be stopped.
Guys, every once in a while, people are like, oh, haha, red and blue share a brain cell. Like, literally, sometimes. You guys don't get it. This is all the time.
We keep having, like, punchline crashes in our texts where, like, we'll clearly both think of a joke at the same time and then just be, like, frantically trying to get it out first. But, yeah, I think that, like... Of course, in season 2, like the vampires, mostly the representative of vampires is Godbrand when it's not Carmilla and Dracula. And like Dracula is just going through his depression arc in this season, and Carmilla is so blatantly scheming nonstop.
And also is so weirdly bad at it.
Yeah, she's remarkably unsubtle in this season. Like, because I really like how they do her in season 3 and 4 because she's so fascinatingly awful. I think it's
she's
incredible.
So messy. She's such a messy character.
Yeah, she's very much motivated by just pure malice and spite. But the thing that keeps coming up in season 4 is that, like, maybe it is in the nature of vampires to constantly be hungry, basically. Like, vampires are constantly overreaching, overextending. They can never build something and be happy with it. They always have to strive for more, which is an interesting take on the curse of vampirism. And I'm very glad that they did that, because that puts them in explicit contrast with the humans, who are mostly like, boy, I wish I could put my damn whip down and sleep for a change. Like, I would love it if the world would stop being constantly on fire.
Yeah.
There's, I'm sure we'll get to it when we hit season 4, but there's also a large plot about agency and people's roles and choosing their own story that we'll get to.
We'll get there.
Yeah, but like the human versus vampire thing portrayed in season 2 is very much like the vampires are acting this way for the most part because they are monsters and this is just what they do. They eat people, people are meat to them, people are livestock. And Dracula's like, you guys I trust because you are actually making the moral decision to kill your peers rather than just corral livestock. Like, you understand that this is personal.
Yeah.
Which is cool.
And a lot of characters are like, what the hell is wrong with you guys? Like, obviously I'm on your side. Like, I also want all the humans dead, but like, you guys good?
Yeah.
There's a little bit of that undercurrent from a few characters. we can extend this discussion back to briefly our boy Dracula, because Dracula's humanity, which he cultivated through his time with Lisa, makes him feel completely and utterly lost. And we've talked about this before, but it also makes him extremely dangerous. The other vampires see humans as purely livestock to be herded and then, eaten from. But for all of Dracula's brooding, which makes the war effort kind of a little bit, weird and not as effective as it could be, it makes him so dangerous because he really secretly decides that he just hates humans well enough and understands them well enough to know that he just wants all of them dead.
Yeah.
And that's kind of his, secret plot development, is he's not actually trying to win the war and just destroy Wallachia. He wants to basically burn the whole world down for his love.
Yeah.
And he himself has enough of that raw spite in him to essentially kill all of the vampires by starvation the long way around for the sake of this vendetta. And with everything the show has provided us thus far, that is a human impulse. That's not a vampire acting normal.
Yeah. What's really cool about and again, we have a whole video about this, but Dracula has thought this through, and what I love about this is that this is the perversion of what Lisa was teaching him, because she shows up and is like, hello, I am a human and you like me, and he's like, oh no, I do. But then she's like, you need to understand humanity, get out there, and he's wandering around seeing everybody. But the interesting thing about that is that, of course, when he comes back and he finds her dead, he's like, all that stuff he's learned about humanity, it just gets corrupted into all that stuff, and they still couldn't find it in their hearts to save Lisa.
Yeah. Exactly.
It's this fascinating little, it's genuinely kind of like you're not you when you're hungry thing, because you know, sometimes when you're in a really bad place and somebody does something just completely innocuous and you're like, I can't believe they're doing something innocuous while I'm over here suffering the torments or whatever. And it's like, it's not their fault. They didn't know, they couldn't do anything about it. But you in that moment of pure suffering are just like, how dare you not understand what I'm feeling and shape your life around it. Mm-hmm. But Dracula has enough power to back up what is frequently described by other characters as a temper tantrum with slow and methodical extermination of the human race, because he's like, again, him and Hector and Isaac are all like, I've facts and logic to this. This is a purely sensible decision. And then the decision is just killing everybody because you're mad at them. And it's like, oh yeah, no emotions involved in this.
Dear humans, you don't want to die, but your blood tastes so good and you're also squishy. Curious.
Yeah, Yet you participate in being mortal. How strange. Oh, man.
Yeah, Dracula's humanity, in addition to his vampiric tendencies, make him dangerous, and then it kills him. This is what ends up causing his death at the end of season 2, because he's basically about to kill Alucard, and then he realizes, oh no, my boy, I'm killing my boy. I must already be dead. And then he's just like, all right, I'm just gonna go poof now. It is the fuel for his revenge until it is the thing that makes him snap out of it and then stop in his tracks.
Yeah.
The humanity in him is the most self-destructive aspect of his character, through his choice to genocide all the humans and then starve all the vampires, and then also to just literally up and, like, die.
You know the connection I just made? Because we were just talking about, like, you know, team bad guys, like, that is the purely logical thing to kill humanity. And then there's Alucard, who is like, I don't want to kill my father. Unfortunately, it is the only way. Like, he has genuinely reasoned through it.
That's his introduction scene at the beginning of season 2, where he's in that shed that Trevor and Sypha were staying in, and he is perfectly half in shadow, half in light. They were not being subtle, but it's so good.
Do you get it?
And he's saying, like, I am Adrian Tepesh, but people have defined me as Alucard, the opposite of you. I don't like that name. I want to just be Adrian, but to honor my mother's wishes and save humanity, I have to be the worst thing that I could be, which is defining myself as you and then setting out to kill you. It's such juicy drama.
It is. And then when Trevor, Sypha, and Alucard have their first little, like, D&D campfire scene, Trevor is, of course, like, yep, he's a vampire, we're gonna go kill him, and Sypha's like, yeah, I mean, he's doing a lot of murders, and Alucard is like, you guys don't understand the gravity of what we are doing here. Like, he's not just my dad. He's a repository of tremendous amounts of knowledge. He could do so much good, but he's on the warpath and he's gone mad, and we have to kill him. Like Dracula's like, we have to kill humanity because they suck and I'm upset. And Alucard is genuinely like, I have to kill my own father because he cannot be stopped any other way. It's a fun bit of contrast because Alucard is unfortunately correct. There is no way of, like, getting Dracula out of his essentially extremely complicated suicide, the way Alucard describes it.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I think that's really interesting because, you know, both of them are very much representatives of humanity in this season, even though they are both vampires or, you know, at least part vampire. Alucard is constantly suppressing his humanity to be okay with doing the killing. And then at the end of the season, he fully breaks down. He's like, I've done it. It's done, and now I have to live with the consequences. Whereas Dracula is suppressing his vampirism to indulge in the very human trait, like you said, of just screaming bloody vengeance and extremely complicated suicide, and not just eradicating humanity, but by extension vampires, even though it takes an amusingly long time for any of the other vampires to think about that, which is fine. They're not known for their long-term plans, of course. It's not like they live for centuries. Oh, wait.
It's very funny how they're like, Dracula, we really could be killing the humans a lot more efficiently, and Dracula's like, oh, if only you knew.
Oh, you're gonna wish you hadn't said that.
Don't worry.
Yeah, but I just think it's so interesting that Dracula is just in this absolutely human maelstrom of pure, overwhelming grief and depression, and Alucard, who is significantly more human than Dracula, is like, I'm going to tamp this down and play the perfect vampire warrior so nobody will know that I am 20 and very sad.
Yes. But with Dracula removed from play, the ultimate evil is no longer in the world, in the avatar of Dracula. So what else is there? And with seasons 2 and 3, we get to see what evil lingers after Dracula's death and what, you know, rises to take its place instead.
I do think that what's so interesting is that it looks like season 3 is setting up like, oh, Dracula's out of the way, but now we've got Carmilla and her evil girl band posse. And then it's like, mostly just very, very human little plots aside from Carmilla, because Carmilla is, of course, like, scheming. Just like, what if we also did the Dracula thing? What if we tremendously overreached, but in a way that didn't kill us? That was clearly the issue. Whereas Marana and Striga are just playing out their adorable little lesbian fairy tale girl boss war crime romance, which I have no notes for. I think it's peak. And then Lenore playing out her extremely fucked up and interesting dynamic with Hector, which is just like so uncomfy to watch because like you could perfectly break down these ladies into the gaslight gatekeep girl boss, and Lenore is one hundo P in the gaslight corner.
Lenore, whose every second of screen time drags the audience further from God.
Oh my God, she's so fascinatingly awful. Like, every time she's talking to Hector, who is at that very moment like beat to shit and wearing a leash, and she's like, well, you know, Carmilla didn't bring you in like a boy prince on a fucking silken feather bed. And it's like, no, she did significantly worse than that, Lenore. Like, come on. But that's what's so interesting.
The worst.
Like, Lenore and Hector deserve each other. It's so fascinating.
Oh, they absolutely do.
But that's what I think is so interesting, because like Lenore's strategy, she's a diplomat. She says like, oh, you know, I think of humans as food, but I also think that, you know, you don't need to get everything through brute force. You can get what you want without having to do that. It's just diplomacy with her meat. And I think that's, I probably should have phrased that better. It's diplomacy.
No, you meant what you said. You meant what you said.
I did, yeah. All right, sure, Hector. But I think that it's interesting because all of them, except for Carmilla, do recognize a degree of the humanity in their enemies. And this comes up a little bit more in season 4 when we see Striga and Marana on the actual field with probably the best fight scene in the show, with some really good fight scenes in it, because it's just one long homage to Berserk, which is how you know it's good. But like for Carmilla, there's no recognition of humanity in any people ever. She truly does not give a f***. And like Lenore is clearly pretending to respect Hector more than she does, and then she kind of goes mask off at the end of season 3. But then in season 4, she's kind of gotten attached, and like, whoopsies, that's her problem.
Yeah.
The whole time it's clear that like they think of humans more like animals, they think of them like pets, whatever. But then Marana and Striga have that weird little moment where Striga is like, look, they're animals, but they fought a hopeless battlefield because unfortunately we made them desperate to protect everything. Like we gave them far too much to lose, and that means we're going to be fighting this awful, unrewarding, unheroic, dishonorable battle forever for the rest of our lives. And that's Striga's breaking point, where she's like, all right, this is a stupid plan, we shouldn't do it.
Yeah.
And it's not about like, I recognize them as warriors. It's more like, wow, these guys are so pathetic, and they still tried to fight me. Even after they saw me like perfectly de-organing their friends like 3 seconds ago with one swing of my massive off sword, just because they couldn't stand who they would be if they didn't try to fight me.
Yeah.
It's cool. The season 3 is really good at like recognition of humanity from the outside. Like we didn't really get much of that in season 2 because Dracula's too depressy, and like everyone else is mostly just like having their weird little vampire internal cat fighting going on.
Yeah.
But season 3, we really get into the machinery of war and conquest, and that's how we see Striga and Marana be like, oh, this is just gonna be a horrifying mess. And Carmilla being like, but look at all my pretty maps I've drawn.
I think the day armor sequence when they're actually out on campaign is from season 4. But
yes, it is.
Yeah, season 3, I don't think I wrote this down. Season 2 is the best episode of the show because we get the most time with our golden trio, but season 3 is by far the most interesting of the show, and that's what basically most of the rest of the presentation is going to be about. So as we go back to our human bastards to talk about, just to kind of knock out quickly because there's not too much to them. The judge, Lindenfeld's head honcho and premier spear pit child murderer. He is on team good guy insofar as it keeps his town safe and allows him to continue unimpeded access to his murder pen.
Yep.
He does good for the sake of being able to then relish evil more efficiently afterwards. And then we also get Sumi and Taka, the trainees of Alucard, turned assassins mid-slam down in the most uncomfortable sequence of the show.
Oh my god, I'm cringing to a ball for that entire episode.
There are two simultaneous fuckings going on in that episode. One is Hector and Lenore, and the other one is Sumitaka and Alucard. And the Sumitaka and Alucard threesome is so much worse.
And it's happening simultaneously with two incredibly plot-relevant fight scenes. It's like, I'm trying to pay attention to Isaac's cool self-actualization moment and Trevor and Sypha's desperate battle to the death against these night creatures. And then I look up, and there's just the most shiny human torso torso I've ever seen.
So these guys show up on Alucard's doorstep wanting to become vampire hunters, but they get a little lost in the sauce. They're like, you're not teaching us magic fast enough, and Alucard's like, oh, you fucking what? And then they try to kill him for it. So that poor Alucard, poor goddamn Alucard.
Yeah.
This is not on par with the death of Lisa, but we get to see the effect that it has on Alucard, because after this sequence is over, he puts their bodies out front of his castle on spears, and it's like,
Oh, boy.
Alucard's Vlading it the fuck up. Yikes.
It's very interesting. I feel like rewatching season 3, I liked it a lot better than when I watched it for the first time, because it very much has to exist for the pacing of the show and the things they set up for season 4. But on its own, it purposefully does not end on a satisfying resolution, and I think that soured it for a lot of people when it first came out. The judge is, I think, genuinely quite interesting, because it seems like the judge's thing is that alongside genuinely trying to maintain order in this small town, he is also a closet serial killer. He's a fucked up dude with weird proclivities that never really get unpacked tremendously, because Sypha and Trevor are just like, yeah, no, absolutely not. We're burning this place to the ground and fucking leaving. But before that, judging him just by his actions when they're dealing with him. Before they learn this about him, they're like, oh man, he went out like a champ. It's so tragic. But at least, he said he got the bad guy, and that's good. And then he seems genuinely horrified when the people in the town get firestormed to serve the evil plan in the finale. He's a weirdly layered character, because he is simultaneously this up child serial killer and also genuinely trying to maintain order in his town, and he doesn't like what he can't control, and he wants these mad monks bringing weird satanic bullshit out of here because they're causing problems. It's the judge. He has his little pleasures. He was both of these things at the same time.
These characters are their little selves, but we also are graced with the good shit. The real winners of this season are Isaac and Prior Sala.
Sala's an interesting pull. I'm curious about why Sala's on the A tier list.
He's essential to the thesis.
Oh, boy.
Yes, no, we'll get there. So Isaac, after he gets thrown into a portal and lands in the Sahara Desert, begins his villain protagonist girl bossification. First off, he's at the watering hole, and then these people try to basically, capture him or whatever, so he kills them, turns them into night creatures, goes to Tunis, tries to get a boat. Guard shows up and attacks him, kills them all, turns them into night creatures, gets on the boat with the ship captain, who's very cool. We'll talk about him in a second.
Oh, we love that
gets
guy.
to Genoa, and then he gets off the boat, and the Genoese are like, "You are terrible, we're going to kill you." And then he kills all of them first, and he says, when someone asks me why I decide to kill the entire human race, it's because you're all so fucking rude, which is so funny as his motivation. Because it's completely in tune with what's been happening to him.
What I think is interesting about this specifically is it lines up with the way I laid out how Lisa gets killed, in the sense that it is a protagonist we're aware of who is educated and just doing their best to help causes they believe in, and then they deal with an obtuse and obstructionist authority figure who thinks they have all the power, except in Lisa's case the guy burns her at the stake, and in Isaac's case he's like, oh, okay, I see how you want the situation to play out. Have you considered murder instead? And it's just it's cathartic, because this is a show that has trained us like, hey, in this situation we really don't want the obstructionist authority figure who will not listen to any logical explanation, such as, my boat is gone, so there is no boat for me to get back onto. You literally saw it happen. They really make us okay with antagonists getting killed if the antagonists just seem dumb, which is an interesting angle, I think. Is, again, it's mostly willful ignorance and obtuseness, and in this case it's a lot of people who are justifiably scared of this guy rocking up with a literal army of hell in his back, but instead of being like, okay, I see your boat is gone, let's arrange you passage out of here, they're just like, we want you to not be here, and we don't have a solution in mind, but we just really want you to not be here. And Isaac is like, have you considered, I want you to not be here? And then, well, he's got the army of demons and the magic powers, so obviously he wins, but
The Genoese guards are like, you're not allowed to be in our town, you suck, get out. And Isaac's like, are you feelings-oriented or solution-oriented right now? But in the slide, I described this as Isaac's Dracula arc, because it is very much the same set of motivations where people in positions of authority are just being so to him that he sets off on this whole quest for revenge where he is radicalized by people being awful to him. It seemed like maybe at the end of season 2 he was kind of onto something, but he's just like, no, I'm gonna kill you all.
Isaac works a single day in customer service and immediately burns the world down.
Yes, exactly. But this whole sequence does offer us some fascinating little insights into his philosophy and theology, which is like, are we doing this? Okay, cool. We've known before that he's a Sufi Muslim, but we learned that he stopped hitting himself on the back with his like little spiky whippy thingy like he did in season 2. He stopped doing that because he's too angry to focus and he can't pray or see God. And there is something that is really interesting about, I've heard Troy Baker describe it as the monster in repose, when someone is like really evil and angry but like uncomfortably calm. When someone who we have seen kill so many people is like, yeah, you know, it's tough because I can't see God. It's like, what? Huh?
This season does a really interesting job of balancing Isaac's humanity with Isaac's carefully curated mask of professional murder that he was doing all through season 2. Because again, the thing we were discussing where Dracula's like, you guys see it clearly, and it's like, oh yes, I've made this decision entirely logically. Of one minor inconvenience befalls me, the world should die, actually. And what I think is cool about it, I think I've said the phrase, what I think is interesting about that like 6 different times. Take a shot and say how many times I said it in the comments for engagement. Jesus Christ, I'm sorry. 4 hours of sleep. I think that it's very cool that Isaac in this season has his humanity just kind of slowly exposed through, I guess, erosion and wear and tear. He doesn't have the comfort of being in Dracula's carefully constructed engine of destruction. It's just him trying to find his way back for the self-determination reason of seeking revenge on the people who were responsible for the death of Dracula. And it's like, well, is that really what you want? And that this sets off a thing that becomes the entire focus of season 4, which is essentially, hey, character, what do you want?
Yeah.
What do you want? And also, do you have the agency to pursue it yourself, or are you going to get caught up in somebody else's story on the way? So Isaac has gone from being Dracula's right-hand lieutenant who, unlike Hector, did not in any time betray him and only ever took actions that were good for Dracula, to being like, well, I don't have Dracula anymore, so now the only person I can be loyal to is myself, ? And then he has to sort of work through that. And in this season, we're sort of seeing him for the first time experience humanity in a context where he is not helpless and being relentlessly abused by it, and he's not on the far side of a giant army of demons doing a bunch of systemic slaughter. So he has to just actually confront people who he could kill, but gets to choose not to. And then he slowly is like teaching himself to make choices rather than feeling like he's being dragged around by his own personal character arc, which I think is really interesting. And this conversation with the ship captain, which is probably the best scene in the season.
Yes, it is. That's why I had you watch this episode.
Yeah, it plays out in a really interesting way because this sea captain has also seen a bunch of shit, but he's basically just kind of like, oh, okay, talk me through this, like what's going on, and it's kind of pointing out like, oh, cool, it sounds like that person did a nice thing for you with no expectation of reparation, so what does that make you think about with humanity as a whole? And it's just so
He said,
cool.
Yesterday a man gave you a gift and made a joke, but all you remember is the Port Authority running you out. If you kill us all, you end human cruelty, yes, but you also end human kindness too. We'll get to that in a second. But yes, that's a good little sequence from that scene.
Yeah.
What I really like about this discussion between Isaac and the ship captain is we get this very, very lengthy window into Isaac's internal motivations when he's trying to figure out what he wants to do with himself. And we get to see how he squares religion with annihilating humanity, because he is, as mentioned, like, I can't pray, I can't see God. This is so hard for me personally. We learn that as a Forge Master, Isaac isn't just creating monsters. He's lifting souls out of hell to put them in bodies and create night creatures. So the way Isaac sees it, this makes him literally like divine will incarnate, because in speaking with the ship captain, he quotes the Prophet Muhammad and says, hell will be emptied and its doors will rattle in the wind. And Isaac sees that line as his justification for pulling every soul he can out of hell and into night creatures. So by creating an army of night creatures in the world, he is the one who is emptying hell, and that makes him an instrument of God's mercy. Which is terrifying when you have someone spell it out like that. It's like, uh-oh, that's obviously heresy, but the fact that it makes sense to you is really concerning.
I'll be honest, I actually absolutely love this about his character, because I feel like the thing that tips it over the edge from like, oh, this is kind of heresy, blasphemy, something, 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 to like, oh, that's genuinely kind of a worthy goal, is in season 4 when he starts being like, hey, night creatures, are you capable of things that aren't just wanton cruelty and destruction? And the answer is yes. Which means he is literally taking souls that are otherwise trapped in eternal damnation for, finite acts in a finite lifetime, and giving them a second chance at life and doing good things. Like, he is legitimately making himself an instrument of... I feel like using the word redemption doesn't work, because redemption in that context has like a specific religious meaning, and it's kind of out the window once you're in hell. But... you pull somebody out of eternal torment and give them a second chance at life. That is a genuinely good and merciful act. Isaac was using it to justify his actions in the process of filling hell with dead people, which was like not working. The equation doesn't balance out.
I'm gonna kill you and I'm gonna bring you back out in like 2 minutes.
Well, that is the question. Like, did anyone ever get murdered and then immediately get night creatured back into the same body? Just like, whoa, Nelly, what's going on? I feel like it's gotta take a little bit longer to get spin cycled out of being a human soul into being a fucked up demon or something.
He describes this as you can use a hammer to build a house or crack a skull. And in season 3, he's in a skull cracking mood. He has been wronged and he wants everyone to die. But as he has conversations with Fly's Eyes for the first time in season 3 and then again in season 4 when he's like, would you like a berry? And Fly's Eyes is like, oh, no, I can't. And then he's like,
couldn't possibly. I'm watching
and
my
he has
weight.
one and he's like, this is actually delicious. Can I have a second? There's probably a longer discussion of the use of berries in 2 scenes in the show, where in one, Lenore is like, here, Hector,
Fetch.
my pet, have a berry, and that is an act of temptation and corruption, whereas for Isaac, offering a berry to this night creature is an act of redemption and not purification, but a kind of like wake up, have a berry, this is good, you can actually enjoy things. It's really interesting, this kind of turn that happens in his character. We know that he's angry in season 3, but he thinks that he's helping, and the fact that he thinks he's helping, Red, like you said, that he has on paper a noble goal, he's just doing the genocide route instead. This is an opportunity for character growth. So he still kills Carmilla, but for justice rather than revenge, because he thinks the world will genuinely be better without this psycho in it. And he resolves after that to build something better for humanity. First with the city that he leaves intact at the end of season 3, and then presumably with Castle Styria in the end of season 4. We see that he has this whole arc where he goes basically way off the deep end at the start of season 3, and then we see the seeds for him to improve as a person, and then we do actually see from like the most terrifying righteous quest for the annihilation of humanity possible, with the like added terror of other theological justifications, which we've seen how dangerous that can be, to like, oh, actually, like, yeah, he kills a lot of people, but he's kind of got an idea here. He's doing something with this now. Okay, that's interesting. So it's really cool to see the journey that Isaac is able to go on over the course of these 2 seasons.
Yeah, it seems like the fundamental change in his character is he starts being capable of imagining a future for humanity.
Yes.
Because
he says that quite explicitly in the end of season 4.
Yeah, very much, because they've posted up in this like, ruined city being built by this madman puppeting a giant army of zombies, which is tremendously f***ed up, which I really liked. It was top tier horror content. Fly Eyes, as a representative of the night creatures, is like, why do you have us building and like cleaning? It's our job to despoil. And he's like, is it? Is it actually your job, or is that just the job that you have been given by people? Maybe you can do other things. And if you only do what I say, why are you complaining about me telling you to do things that aren't despoiling things? It's just a fun little debate. It seems like Isaac has gone from like, humanity is fundamentally terrible and should die, to like, humanity will do things beyond my control sometimes. And, as long as I'm not here to be mad about it, it's probably fine. They can't be rude to me, so I guess they deserve to live.
Yeah, it is a good character arc, and I really do like where he ends up, but I enjoyed that brief window in season 3 when he's like on the ship between Tunis and Genoa, where he is at his absolute messiest.
Yeah.
And if we want messy, then Prior Sala is gonna fucking give us something messy.
Ooh, boy.
So him and his monks are utter madmen, and I love that they are here in this season because they are so insane. They are ridiculously evil at every step, and they are so off-putting and just unnerving in every second of screen time. Oh, they're so good. So what happened is, in this town of Lindenfeld, the town that the judge is in charge of, Sala's priory was visited by a night creature who basically fell out of the sky to spread the good word of Dracula and then chill in their basement. It gave them the alchemical symbol for black sulfur, which is the sign of hell, and was like, now do some stuff for me. I'm just going to go sit here in the basement while you guys work on that. Sala then creates this entire philosophy along with the rest of the monks based off of this visit they got from the night creature, where he thinks that Dracula is in hell with his beloved wife, Lisa, who is great, and wasn't it an awful shame that she was killed by the church? But Lisa is alive in hell. So what we should do is everything we can to unite everybody in hell with Lisa and Dracula because they were so great. Uh-oh, that's also genocide.
Whoopsies. How do we keep ending up here?
Yeah, wait a minute. He has a new understanding of their relationship with God, and it's stuff we've seen before, very Paradise Lost, where Lucifer, whose name means Lightbringer, was part of God's plan, and he says the night creatures are also bringers of light. So hell's wisdom is therefore God's wisdom, and they want to revive Dracula with this wisdom of hell to bring everybody down there and then kind of unite the world permanently in hell with Dracula and Lisa, which is so goddamn messy. I love it. And this is not anything crazy. It's very Paradise Lost. It's not revolutionary in its construction, but it's effective in this context much more than Batman v Superman. If God is all powerful, then he can't be all good. We have to go kill Superman. Stupid.
Snyder
awful,
catching
terrible.
strays in this random detailed diatribe.
Yes, he is,
Amazing.
and deservedly. What works in this is that we've done the legwork in the first few seasons with, God isn't here, that we have established a theology in this show. We understand, there are things going on in heaven and hell, and we can put what's going on into the context of the magic system and the world that's going on. So when Isaac talks about emptying hell and putting them in night creatures, we know what he means. There's a mechanical effect of that in the story. We can see that these elements of more kind of divine nature are at work in the background. And it is extra juicy when hell is, in fact, 100% real, and you can, in fact, rip souls out of it. There's a tangible power to the theology. So when we see stuff like this night creature politely asking to be crucified in the basement, it's like, uh-oh, that's, freaky and weird, but also the fact that it draws on these divine motifs is there's this extra bit of this just, this world-building kind of grit, and that makes it extra scary when characters are like, oh, cool, I figured it out.
Yeah.
Genocide.
I've got it. I've cracked this one wide open. I also think it's interesting that this night creature was specifically created by Isaac, because the whole point is the prior and his co are like, oh, the night creature, following the night creature's will, and the night creature's will is the will of its master, which is the revival of Dracula, which is what your creator Isaac wants. And it's like, yeah, probably when he made the night creature, but this is well beyond Isaac's current purview, because we know what Isaac's up to at this very moment, and it's not got anything to do with this.
It's like Isaac hears that Lindenfeld explodes, and he's like, oh, shit, was that one of mine? God, damn it.
Man.
All of this with what we get from Isaac and what we get from Prior Sala is it's so fun to see turbo heretics be so nuts and so calm about it, which makes it so much more unsettling. This whole season is the perversion of faith, which is something that is only doable at a human level. The vampires really interact at a profound distance from divinity. They are creatures of fundamental unholiness. So this corruption of divine ideas is something that can only be done by humans. The season has a lot of cosmic, Lovecraftian type forces at play with the infinite corridor and
so good.
Larger forces that are just kind of existing in the world, and hell exists and it's always just kind of under there, but it only really causes problems when people, rip souls out of it to create night creatures. Things like the mass transmutation of souls into divine fuel for a night creature to open up a portal to the infinite corridor. Those kinds of things are leveraged from just facts of the universe, spooky and weird, but otherwise not really problematic, into threats by humans specifically. So there's a second inversion happening here where humans are empowering supernatural evil, yes, but we see the inversion of holiness to justify evil. So it's not just that these guys are evil, but that they are corrupting something of the divine in order to accomplish their evil. And we've talked before that holiness is a guaranteed weapon against vampires. Silver medallions of Mary, crucifixes, sunlight of God, holy water, stuff like that. So seeing, again, not just the God isn't here from the first season, but seeing it subverted and broken and turned into a motivation for evil, not just, oh, God isn't here, we can walk in here and kill you, but I'm going to use God's own power to do unspeakable horrors, is so unnerving beyond just a guy being evil for fun. We love Dracula's messy character arc, but this is really cool because it's so different. It's a completely different type of evil beyond any personal grievance. There's this deeper, like, I am part of something so much more than me, and that fanatical aspect of it makes these characters uniquely evil in this season.
Yeah, because there is that little element which sets up a lot of what's going on in season 4, where the priests start quietly leaving to evangelize in other places about, like, Dracula's the greatest, we have to bring him back. Although that kind of, I'll admit, I think I might have missed something on my rewatch, which would make sense because of the circumstances under which it happened. It kind of felt like at the very end of the season, Prior Sala forgot that he was super into this idea the whole time. And like he sees the infinite corridor and suddenly he's like, oh, what? That's crazy, man. And like books it. It's like, wait, I thought you were on board with this whole getting Dracula out of hell thing. How did you think it was going to happen?
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
In season 4, it seems like the whole run through is like all these weird little cultists are trying to find a way to resurrect Dracula because they want to bring him back. This funniest possible way they could have opened the season is just Trevor is so fucking done with people trying to bring Dracula back.
Yeah.
Talking to another crowd of completely dead silent NPCs being like, why the fuck would anyone do that? Would you do that? No? See?
I wish I could kill you twice.
But it's interesting because, of course, that whole thing turns out to be a scheme, spoiler alert, by Death itself, which just wants Dracula to come back insane and murder everybody on an unimaginable scale. So, like, that's all well and good. But the Prior and all of their motivations to bring Dracula back, it's not really that. It's more like, wouldn't it be cool if everybody went to hell? So then at the end, when it's like, we're bringing Dracula out of hell, and then the proselytizing that they do is, let's all get Dracula out of hell. So I'm a little bit unclear on how it all comes together.
I think there's a distinction. I think Prior Sala basically wanted to open a portal that would kind of like suck everyone in. It's not explained super clearly.
Okay.
We get a sense of internality to what's going on in Sala's mind, where the plan is obviously whatever the narrative needs to be the worst thing imaginable.
Yeah.
I think he's surprised when monsters start coming out of the portal rather than like being greeted by like hell equivalent of pearly gates, come on in, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I think he was expecting a much more peaceful ramp downward into the fiery depths of hell. There is a degree to which, like, it can get a little bit weak in the Ultimate Execution. I will grant you that.
Okay, yeah. All right. I think that's part of why I was a little surprised that Sala was on the short list of, like, A-tier human villains in the season, because I was like, I kind of got the impression that Sala was just filling the role of the bishop, but with a little less charisma, where he's like... But again, the difference there is that the bishop truly thinks that he's on the straight and narrow, whereas Sala is like... Oh, yes, our eyes were opened. We really had this whole thing figured out now. It turns out if God made hell, then that means hell is good. And it's like, I don't know about that. And he's mostly there to interact with Germain, who is an interesting human face of stuff that we'll get to. But in season 3, he's an asshole, but he is representative of the pursuit of knowledge.
Yeah.
And that means putting him in opposition with Prior Sala, who's kind of filling the same slot as the bishop of, like, obstructionist authority figure up to their own bullshit. Although in Sala's case, he's trying to do heresy and, deconsecrate things and open a portal to hell for possibly ambiguous reasons. But Germain, I think, is a very interesting figure for this specific thesis, because he shows up in season 3, and he's just... He's just an asshole. He's just so rude to everybody.
A pathetic idiot asshole.
He's absolutely self-centered and self-aggrandizing, but at the same time, he's just so not used to, like, people being nice and good to him that he gets thrown for a loop when Trevor and Sypha just decide to help him out of the goodness of their hearts. Because, like, Trevor's also an asshole, but, like, he will still do good things, whereas Saint-Germain is truly only in it for himself, and then it's just so baffled that they're like, hey, we're gonna help you out, that he's just like, oh, okay, wow, I wasn't prepared for this. Then, of course, in season 4, he takes kind of a hard swerve, but in a way that fully makes sense for who he is as a person, because, again, he's just this relentlessly, like, rude, self-centered jerk, so it's very easy to just convince him, hey, this thing you want is on the other side of all these innocent people, and he's like, whoa, mama, let me at him.
Let's go. Yeah.
Wolf whistle.
No, exactly.
Oh, boy.
The show puts in the work to show that the task of doing evil is a laborious process. A lot of these schemes have many moving parts to them in each season of evil things that are happening. And it is at every point willed into existence, in this case by humans either driven by fear, hate, or twisted ideology, in the case of Salah, Isaac, and some others. But I think the show is able to feel very full because we see a range of different people doing different things for sometimes similar, sometimes distinct reasons. So we get one version of, hey, let's tap into hell and go, make contact with Dracula because him and his wife are so great in season 3, and a very different version of, hey, let's go open up hell and make contact with Dracula and his wife so they can kill everyone, lends a little bit of variety and depth to the world where there are a lot of players and a lot of different motivations in this grand mechanism of the story. And I like that it affords a very wide characterization space beyond just heroic humans and vampire villains. There's a large space of options for being a shitty asshole in the middle of those two extremes. Yeah,
they do a very good job of having a lot of different characterizations for people on both the heroic and villainous sides of things. Season 4 also introduces some more human, like, good guys. Greta
from Dynasty.
And she's fun because she's profoundly, like, blunt and unsubtle, but not in a super rude way. Like, she and Alucard kind of hit it off immediately just because she's initially like, hey, no bullshit, I need you to commit to actually stay here and, like, help these people out. You can't just do one extremely cool, well-animated fight scene and then f*** off. And he's like, okay, yeah, I'm gonna stay. And she's like, great. Also, that was a very cool fight scene. Like,
Greta's like, listen, Alucard, I need you to promise you didn't blow the season's animation budget on that one scene, because if you did, we're f***ed.
Yeah, have you seen the storyboards for the final thing? My God. Oh, God, that's funny.
Have you seen the concept art, dude? We are f***ed.
But what I think is so cool about the way they do Sandra, I'm trying frantically to find ways to rephrase. What I think is so interesting, Saint-Germain is completely consistent with who he was in season 3, but he has gone from being a weaselly little kind of pathetic secondary protagonist to being actually, like, oopsies right-hand man to the main villain. Sorry, guys. I just really wanted to have sex with my girlfriend again. Saint-Germain is an interesting installment in a completely different thesis about Castlevania, which is how the different characters deal with isolation. Because every single main character in this show is in some way isolated, and that includes a lot of the main villains. Dracula was holed up in his castle before Lisa showed up and then goes completely mad with grief. Like, he's surrounded by generals, but he's still completely alone. And the one person who could understand him, Alucard, he drives away. And then, of course, in the final surprise twist happy ending, Dracula's back and he's got Lisa again. So he can actually is capable of having a happy ending, and he's out in the world, exploring it, interacting with people, healing. Trevor is completely isolated at the beginning of the show because all the other Belmonts have been excommunicated and exploded. Sypha leaves her people to join Trevor, and she freaks out about being alone. Alucard is isolated on account of being torn between two worlds and hated by both. And then there's Saint-Germain, who is isolated because he's genuinely got kind of a personality and is just sort of a grifter and con man who has met one person in his life that he liked, and she decided to go into the infinite corridor and an infinite library of infinite knowledge rather than hang out with him. Saint-Germain is probably the only one of these characters whose isolation doesn't come across as, like, cool and Byronic and tragic. It's just like, oh, buddy, I think this is all of my roommates / ex-girlfriends are assholes situation where, like, there's a common factor here and it's not the entire rest of the world. And so Saint-Germain just comes across as, like, uncomfortably realistically pathetic in the way that he is. And his entire arc is like, there's only one human being who I've ever liked who seemed to tolerate me enough that, like, we hung out and boned down at least once. and I'm going to get back to her. On God, it's gonna happen this time. And then, well, it doesn't, because that's a motivation. Trevor and Sypha, like, give him this chance, because they talk about, like, oh, it's weird how he immediately opened up to us about this. I guess he must be really lonely. And then they're immediately like, kind of like our boyfriend Alucard. Isn't it weird that we left him alone at the end of season 2 and just f***ed off? Maybe we should reconsider that for season 4, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But with Saint Germain, it's like he's alone and isolated. And then every time we spend any time with Saint Germain, we're like, oh, that's why. Oops. Oh, boy.
Yeah. Saint Germain. Yeah. No, he's the worst. But let's pivot back to the Castlevania of it all.
Oh, right,
and
the
put this in the
vampires.
context of the fact that this is a show about vampires. Vampires are, in this show, they are textually and fundamentally evil. Their survival is predicated on the literally eternal, constant murder of humans for their blood, and most of them seem to get a kick out of it and a sick, twisted kind of glee from that murder as well. They are evil, and part of the reason that they're so interesting to unpack is because they are morally and in their character archetypes a fixed entity that basically cannot change. And in this conversation, in this scene here, Hector and Lenore are talking about like vampire philosophy, and the vampire's virtue is that they want systems to stay perfectly consistent because vampires are so eternal. They need consistency. They need their environments to stay put, and that is a kind of virtue. But the opposite of that is looking at humans. The capacity for them to change and grow does create opportunities for them to be evil, as we have seen, but it also creates opportunities for them to be better, like in the case with Isaac. And there will always be those opportunities because the world is constantly changing. Everything is in flux, and humans are poised to kind of latch onto that and change, whereas vampires do everything they can to abjure that away from them.
I just thought of something, which is how that ties in with Dracula, because of course, Dracula is the most vampire-y vampire to ever, vamp. But I think what's interesting, God damn it, Lisa changes him just by virtue of being so human. She really does turn him in a way that almost feels supernatural, not because she's actually like making him more human, but because she is so fundamentally on the side of growth and change and progress that Dracula kind of gets caught up in her. He's like, wow, that angle is really interesting. I suppose I could start changing. It's like vampires are not, in this version, cursed, tragic, undead beings that cannot ever grow. Like, it's clear that they can if they choose to. They just stagnate easily if not kicked out of their comfort zone by somebody like Lisa. And Dracula is the only vampire we see who's really open to that. Lenore is actually a really good example of how most vampires cope with something like that, because her and Hector's tremendously f***ed up, they deserve each other relationship notwithstanding, Hector is like, I think I'm interested in changing, and Lenore is like, I'm going to literally kill myself instead of do that. And then she does, and it's like, okay, cool, fascinating. He was like, we're going to change, and she could only see an eternity in prison, and she was like, I'm not going to live like that forever. And it's like, you wouldn't have to, but the fact that you can't recognize that is what makes this tragic. And she's just experienced a profound change. It used to be her and the other 3 vampire ladies, and now Striga and Marana are off being evil vampire lesbian girl bosses forever.
Because they have the capacity to recognize, like, in the face of seeing their castle on fire, maybe we should do something different. Maybe we can actually just leave and it's fine.
Because they're tacticians. They can recognize when a field of battle changes. Whereas Carmilla is power mad. She fell for the vampire fallacy of more, all the time, forever, let me eat the entire world. And she was like, I'm doing this because it's cool and smart and will make me more powerful and sexy, rather than just like, oh, you're a vampire, this is the only trick you know. Again, the whole humanity is about change, vampirism is about stagnation. That's, don't say it. That's what I think makes Lenore so...
compelling.
Yeah, compelling's good.
Help me help you, Red.
I'm trying so hard.
I know, and I appreciate it.
It's like I've got like 3 gigs available of working memory out of like a 2 terabyte hard drive in here. Hector slowly accepts like change, growth. I want to do other stuff. I want to write a book. I want to get a goddamn break once in a while. Isaac is interested in pursuing justice and building things for the good of future generations, which is extremely cool. And then Lenore is like, nope, the only thing I've seen is that the one thing I've built that worked has now broken, and rather than try and find my way in a new world, or the way she sees it, live forever in a cage, I'm going to go out and explode. But then we get Dracula, and Lisa being like, hey, let's actually go out and live a nice long life, eventually reconnect with Alucard later. He needs closure. I'm sure he wouldn't love to see that we're alive again. It's like, guys, you've drastically misread that situation, but that's okay.
We talked briefly about the whole idea of agency in season 4, very explicitly spelled out, maybe too explicitly for my taste. All the characters in season 4 that have even the slightest bit of possible heroic coding to them are expressing ideas of agency, like let's take charge, let's take the opportunity to be better. Isaac has this arc, Hector has this arc, Trevor and Sypha and Alucard have this arc. Saint Germain does not, because he is being completely reactive to what other people told him to do. He thinks he's being proactive. He thinks he's the good guy, but he's not. He's being reactive to information that he was given by this alchemist lady in the library, even though he thinks that he's solving alchemy.
Yeah, he thinks I'm an alchemist, that's why. Well, you're right, but I actually think that this whole thing ties together a little more cleanly than just a discussion of agency. It ties into that conversation, again, between Isaac and the captain on the boat. Are you the main character in your story, or are you becoming a side character in somebody else's story? The reason why I think this is actually the core of the theme rather than agency is because Trevor and Sypha basically say that overtly when they have a little breather. They're talking about, like, we've been too reactive. I think Trevor says, did we just get caught up in someone else's story again? And it's pretty clear that, like, this is the theme that we're working with. It is about finding your own story to be a part of. So Isaac writes his own story to be a part of, and Hector is kind of like taking a breather, and then he's like, maybe I'll write a book, which feels to me like the little wink to the audience of like, and that's how we know this story. Hector wrote it down. And Trevor and Sypha are doing their whole thing because they're like, we have to stop reacting and start acting, and then mostly continue to react to shit happening all season, which is okay, that's fine. But the thing is, I actually think Saint Germain is crucial to this arc because Saint Germain is so convinced that he is the hero of his own story. That is the entire reason he's so intolerable. He's got like Don Quixote levels of delusions of grandeur and just enough real power to back it up in his own head. And he's just like so fucking rude to everybody. Like immediate red flag, he's rude to the barmaid when he and Trevor and Sypha are hanging out for no fucking reason. It's like, Saint Germain, for God's sake.
Yeah.
The barest human decency. And then in this season, the alchemist lady gets his number immediately. She's like, you know how to do this. You just have morals and principles in your way. But if you really cared about fulfilling the magnum opus of alchemy and getting your girlfriend back, you would do whatever it takes, which would coincidentally involve killing a lot of people. I'm sure that's fine. And he's like, you know what? Yeah, I'll do... because she frames it like a sacrifice. He's like, what more do I have to lose? And she's like, you haven't sacrificed, you've lost. They're not the same thing. You haven't given up anything intentionally. You've just had things stripped away from you. Essentially, she's taking the agency thing and twisting it on its head. Like, you haven't had any agency in your loss. You need to start giving up, mister. And so he sacrifices his moral code and starts killing people. And then death shows up and is like, surprise, you are so easily led. And like, that's the thing with Saint Germain. He is convinced right up until basically the very last minute that like, this was my idea, I am become God. And then death rocks up and is like, hello, I am going to kill you if you don't do what I want. And by that I mean continue to do what I want, because everything you've done here is what I've wanted. And immediately you can see it like break him a little bit. But even then, he can't bring himself to sacrifice, because he could have just been like, all right, you know what? Kill me. I won't bring Dracula back. He's like, oh, I don't want to do it, but I'm going to do it anyway. Oh, no. The only thing he actually exercises any agency in is saving Trevor from the world's most death flag riddled final battle, which was a true heroic effort, and I really appreciated it because, damn, I was not expecting the grimdark, edgy show where they can say to be like, hey, we're going to actually let the main character live and get a goddamn nap eventually. Right off into the sunset with his polycule, and everything works out great. But I think that actually the arc of agency and decision making and whose story are you a part of, Saint Germain is actually crucial to that from the outside as basically a good bad example. He's a good bad example of how not to do that because it's so easy to convince him to just do the world's most heinous crimes just because a girl with no voice actor, no single, they couldn't get anybody in to like make a noise when they're talking about alchemy. Oh boy, it's like when you notice it, it becomes impossible to ignore. So I'm sorry in advance to all of you, but you should watch the show just to see if I'm right. Saint Germain's whole agency or lack thereof, he's convinced that he's in charge. The ultimate tragedy of his story is he's not in charge of a goddamn thing. Not even reconnecting with the girl he likes, because both times both times he opened the portal and she could have come through, she was like, well, that sucks, bro, bye. It's just like,
exactly.
He truly has no agency in his life.
And I think this highlights our golden trio,
Yay!
Trevor, Sypha, and Alucard, because by the rules of this show, as we have seen in the seasons, they have so much reason to be evil, so much awful stuff has happened to them. They could have at any point decided, actually, f*** all of you. They all have suffered tremendously and yet still choose to be good. Despite everything, their humanity makes our heroes the heroes.
Aww.
So the final thesis is the face of evil is often human, but the human face need not be evil.
Aw, that's nice.
Yeah, it's clean, huh?
Yes, that's very crisp. I approve. As soon as they dropped this poster, I was like, oh, Trevor's dead is what you're telling me. Because, like, oh, he's looking back wistfully over his shoulder as the Belmont crest explodes off of him with a skull in the background. My read was, all right, guys, if Sypha is pregnant, Trevor is dead. They played me. They played me like a goddamn fiddle, and it was great.
Yes, they did. Did you have the agency in this viewing experience?
Oh god, it's all been their ultimate scheme to make me enjoy a good, well-written experience that takes me on an interesting journey. No, this show's fun. And I do think that this is a really interesting angle to unpack it from, because it really feels like it starts with the easy premise of, like, vampires bad, good guys good. And then as soon as Alucard shows up, it's easy to forget because they kind of get it out of their systems quickly, but he and Trevor spend the entire second season sniping at each other with the most, like, basic, you're a vampire and my family kills vampires, or from Alucard's perspective, your family has hunted mine for generations and I'm still pissed about it. And it's interesting because, like, he doesn't really have a leg to stand on, unfortunately, because all the other vampires do in fact need to eat humans to live, and therefore are big problems. They usually just need to get killed.
Yeah.
But Alucard's existence immediately disproves the fundamental thesis that vampires bad, humans good is the way it always plays out. The fact that Dracula's the big bad of seasons 1 and 2 is like, well, but I mean, yeah, it's great that he has a tragic backstory, but he's still clearly the problem. And it's like, he is the problem, but it's not like we solve it by getting his health bar to 0 and then making him explode.
Evil persists in the world even still after Dracula wills his own health bar down to 0.
Yeah, exactly. It's an interesting thesis that they kind of have to tackle, because it's all well and good to say, like, oh, you know, there's shades of gray in this world, but humans have very little excuse. Vampires do in fact need to eat humans to survive, which means on some level they're gonna be problems. Nobody in this show is just evil because we needed a bad guy for the heroes to fight, except for Death. And I actually like that, because
he's a force of nature. He's not a person, he's a concept.
Exactly. He's a force of nature. He exists to scavenge off of death and souls, which means he's pissed that they won the game too early. He's like, hey, get back here. I demand the rematch. There's a whole... Oh, God. It's funny, like, you hated the way they voiced Death, I remember, when we talked about this the first time.
I cannot stand Varney's voice. It's good when Varney's the bumbling idiot of the season, but when he turns into Death and he still sounds like goddamn freaking Varney, he's an idiot goofball.
It's interesting because we know from his impersonation of the Alchemist that he can do other voices. He just chooses to be like, don't you think that's weirdly f***ed up? And it's just like, come on, man. And, like, it didn't bother me, and then when I watched it again, I was like, oh, it bothers me a little bit, actually.
I love this show so dearly, and we easily could go on more and more detailed diatribes, and frankly, we might.
Probably. Tune in for whenever Nocturne Season 2 comes out. I'm excited to develop thoughts about it.
I mean, we have the whole, like, colonialism as vampirism thesis cooking from Season 1 that I'm very interested to see how that evolves in Season 2, so we will surely be back.
Just like Dracula.
Castlevania as a show is one that I would basically describe as structurally perfect. There are things that I would change, like, you know, little bits of dialogue here and there.
Yeah.
Maybe get some extra characters, some extra voices. But in terms of the structure and how it conveys its ideas, this show is borderline flawless. And I am glad that I was able to convey just one reason why that is the case through this presentation. So, bye!
Beautiful. Incroyable. Chef's kiss.